Okay, I think this is the second to last parenting talk, right? You get, young man.
It might be the last. It might be the second to last.
Oh, Peter's got this like down, guys. So we're doing moral development today. I'm going to like jump into psychobabble in the beginning because that's like, I love psychobabble, like that's what I do. And then we'll try to make it a lot more practical for you in applying the psychobabble in the second half. So I'll zoom through as fast as I can. Pause me, stop me. If you have questions, I don't mind if you raise your hand and interrupt, like please do. Yeah, and I'll probably ask if you need clarifying. Oh, really? I hate this thing a lot, so I'm like very bitter about the microphone. Okay, so this is obviously a parenting series, so I'm going to talk to parents. I apologize if you're not yet a parent, or if you're going, like, if it's whatever phase you're at. I'm trying to like get to younger and older, but for our youngers, we are very much remember all the things that we are learning and how our children are learning as they're growing up. Psychology and biology and medical doctors and all, we talk a lot about physical development, social development, language development. They talk about it a lot. There are so many models out there, many evidence-based models, and some not evidence-based, but there's so many models out there on like what is appropriate and like what to compare them to, and are they within the range of okay and all these things. What we don't talk about enough, but there is also evidence, is that reality is they're also developing morally. Along with their physical development, as they're learning to walk, talk, crawl, all those things, they're learning different cognitive things, like we'll talk about them. Along the way, they're also learning morals. But we don't emphasize enough that reality that there are models out there, plenty of them, many of them, with a lot of research that are scientifically valid, that we can also be leaning into to help us understand how we can best support their development. We get the right toys to help them develop their fine motor and their gross motor and help them walk and move, and we get all the right toys for that. But we don't necessarily get the right toys to help them grow morally. And so my hope is to try to help you think through how can we give them the right toys to help them grow. And what does that even look like? I'm going to only there are many models. I did show and tell, guys. So there's a lot of books here that you can pull up, look at, see if you want to buy any. Some of them are older and out of print, and some of them are newer. But you can look at those. I'm going to only do two theories. The first theory is Kohlberg's. He based his moral development on Piaget's cognitive development. I'm sorry, it's very psychobabble. This is like my wheelhouse. This is what I teach, so I like it, and it's a lot. Like, you can tell me to tone it out if you need me to tone it down. So quickly, what is that cognitive development? I want to just give you a little bit of hints so that you can understand why the moral development is what it is. All right? So the cognitive development is like, how do they think, right? We know when they're first born, they're colorblind, right? They are only seeing black and white. That's true. Yes. Yeah. So that's why a lot of the toys have a lot of high contrast. They're not like the pails and stuff. That's a very newer development, and it's very aesthetically pleasing for the parent, but does nothing for the child. Those like light and darks, that's what they can see the difference between. So they develop, the cones in their eyes develop as they get older. So if you can imagine, like all the bursts of colors they're trying to experience, like as those newborns are, like they're experiencing so much. But the cognitive development moves like from super simple colorblind, right, to abstract concepts as we go into adulthood. Piaget, to tell you the truth, Piaget put out this idea that not every human will be able to get to abstract concepts. That has to be really fostered to grow their capacity. But in that beginning stage, that until 2 years old, the sensory motor is really the mission of their cognitive development. Being able to understand their senses and their bodies, controlling their bodies through their thoughts. right? Managing those instinctual suck reflexes and all those like innate behaviors that help them to survive. They learn to make them voluntary by year 2. All of that, walking, crawling, grabbing, fine motor, seeing something, be able to move my hand to the place that I see and bring it back, that's the mission those first 2 years. We think of, like we talk about peekaboo all the time. Peekaboo is such a fun game to play, right? But there's a purpose to peekaboo. It's because we're wanting to grow their ability to understand that even if I don't see a thing, it's still there, right? It was there before, it didn't go away just because you can't see it. Object permanence. Starting to grow that idea of like a little bit of abstract, a little bit, right? And then from 2 to 7, that kind of elementary, very elementary, until like 2nd grade, 1st grade, symbolic thought. So using language, their language is bursting. So every sound symbolizes a thought, right? And if I do my eyes a certain way, if I move my body a certain way, it expresses something. That symbolic thought, that's where they're growing a lot from 2 to 7. The use of imagination. Everything is very egocentric at this time. All about me. The world revolves around me. I cannot cognitively and biologically, they cannot think about how to make a decision for the other until they move on to 7-11. And then they can think beyond themselves, capacity-wise. It is unreasonable to ask a 5-year-old to be able to understand, they can understand their impact on the other, but it's still going to be based on what I know. It's still very egocentric, my experiences. Then we can move into operational thoughts where they think starting to think more logically, starting to understand that they can manipulate symbols, they can be aware of the outside world beyond their experiences. And then, if you are really capable, if you have a lot of nurturing, if you are really practicing, then during adolescence to adulthood now, we really work towards understanding abstract thought. So this is really used for like when we build curriculum, when we build Sunday school lessons, how we explain the Trinity has to change from kindergarten to an 11-year-old, to a junior high kid, to a college person. How we explain the Trinity has to be within their developmental capacity and the way that their brains are able to think through. Okay? So, again, I want to just give you that so that I can focus on this. So, Kohlberg used the cognitive model to understand how we can develop morals. What is happening with their moral and value development. And that we talk about, Kohlberg, talks about morals not as faith-based, but simply as values. We will try to use that and integrate our spirituality into the psychology. What is our orthodox values that we want to grow? So if you think about that reality that in the very beginning, until about 7-ish, the little ones are so overwhelmed and just managing all their new experiences, they cannot yet think beyond themselves. It's all very egocentric. It's all through my lens of my experiences. So then when you look at moral development, obedience and punishment, self-interest, conformity and interpersonal accord, so I want to get along with people, I want to fit in. All these things are very egocentric. They're based on their cognitive ability. So in the beginning, infancy, of course, they're very little. If they're doing something there's wrong, like throwing a toy on the floor. There's both a behavioral, I'm not going to pick it up if you throw it on the floor, way to teach them. But then there's also the reality that they might see parent gets mad. I get uncomfortable because parent's voice raises. So if I'm uncomfortable, I don't want to do it. It's really an avoidance of punishment. But then it's not because they understand what's good and bad. It's because I want to be comfortable and not comfortable that they're making moral decisions. But it's not really a decision at this point. They're babies. Which is really important to highlight because I have heard enough parents say, they know better when they're 2. And they don't know better. Not yet. They truly don't. But if we want to increase good behavior at this point, we want to give them a lot of reward so they feel comfort associated to the good behavior. Because it's not being made based on what's good or right. It's just what gives them comfort. And then when we move into preschool, so preschool is like what, 3, 4-ish, 5-ish? They start to be able to understand, I will get rewards, and I want to avoid punishment. It's not necessarily the nuance of that abstract what's good and right. Not quite yet. That's going to come more 2nd grade, 1st grade. But here in preschool, it's, again, I want to avoid punishment. I want to secure a greater benefit. I make the teacher happy. And the teacher's nice to me when I don't hit my friends. If I hit my friends, I sit in the corner. And that doesn't feel good. It's not out of empathy. It is out of punishment and reward. So at this age, when you're wanting to really foster specific behaviors, this is why the sticker charts and the candy bowl and the reward bowls, they work so well. Many people struggle with those ideas because they feel like I'm minimizing the good. I want them to do the good because it's good. I get that. But not yet. They don't have that capacity to understand that yet. They need that concrete affirmation. Cognitively, they need that. They don't have that capacity yet. Then we start to move into school age. Kohlberg very intentionally doesn't put ages. It's school age infancy, and he does that intentionally because he does say that this doesn't come naturally. The moral development is not as natural as physical development or as cognitive development, even though later on, Piaget says, as you move into the more abstract, that's not natural, it has to be taught, and it has to be fostered. But he's very clearly many people do not get past level 3, or past level 2 into level 3, because they don't make the intentional effort to grow. They won't get into social contract.
Ever?
If they don't have the intention to grow their moral base or choose right and practice it, they won't. Many people don't. Yeah, it's not natural. We have to teach it. So we should be teaching, if we have to do it, be efficient and do it according to what's going to work in their developmental model. So don't frustrate yourself and frustrate your child.
So you mean if he's not teach these moral by certain age, he's not going to learn it ever?
No, they can learn it, and they can learn it later. But if they're not intentional, if it's not presented to them and asked and challenged to them to grow, they're not going to. So St. Moses the Strong, he came upon his stuff much later in life, but he was taught and challenged by Father, but thank you, right? He was taught through his fathers. As an adult, they can come, but it didn't come naturally. So when we move into the second stage is when we're starting to be able to decenter myself, right? Not everything is about me. I can understand. I'm comfortable enough in my body. I'm comfortable enough now with processing all this new information. I've done all of that. Now I can start to look outside myself as we move into school age. Here's when we can start to actually empathize. Start to think a little bit more abstractly. The idea that something My son is doing these essays right now, a series of essays in school, where like sometimes the right decision, the biblical decision, is against the law. So is it good or wrong? Like, is that good if you're doing something wrong? And like these abstract questions, if they're hard, right? That flexibility, I could not present that to him in second grade, or even fourth grade, maybe not yet. Now he's in 8th grade, he can start to think through. Though it's not easy, it's very uncomfortable, but having those conversations and writing those thoughts out and debating that, he can start to grow that flexibility. But that's not until he's 13, right? He's like in the middle there of school-aged and teen. So, conformity and interpersonal accord. The good boy. They do things to be liked, to be the good boy, the good girl, to start to grow their identity of who they are. The effort is made to secure approval. I want to be liked. Peer pressure at this age is very real. So it's a little bit different, right? I see more peer pressure happening in like 6th, 7th grade, 8th grade, right? Like the middle school. He's saying it starts earlier than that, where they want to fit in.
I think it starts earlier, but the scale of how bad it is, I think is just not
There you go.
noticeable.
That's it.
You know, it's like if a kid sneaks a candy when they're not supposed to, it's different than doing drugs. So I think maybe we don't notice it at the younger age because it's not as big of a deal. But I still think the peer pressures. My daughter's 7, I think she experiences it.
So starting to have conversations around like you want to fit in, but you're also different than the world. So what is that balance? You're not going to do the things of the world. You're not going to get that specific outfit that's immodest. You're not going to get that or drink that specific drink that builds your muscles and makes you look a certain way. Like whatever it is, how are we going to help them feel like they are a good girl, they fit in, and they have friends, and they know who they are? As a 7, 8, 9-year-old, they want to have that confidence in who they are, but not fit into the world and not be of the world. We have to have very distinct and clear conversations with them about what that is, because they are experiencing it, and they need you to be practical. So can I use these words when they're using those words? Can I listen to this music when they're listening to that music, and why not?
I always, it's that line of, if blah, blah, blah jumped off a bridge, would you?
Yeah.
I say that all the time, I should probably come up with something else. Like what, I mean,
Yeah.
I should. But like, do you find yourself doing that?
Oh, yeah.
Like just because they're doing it?
Yeah. Yeah. But then we want to deepen that like they can start to have that deeper conversation about who they are.
At what age?
7.
Really?
Yeah.
But they get bored of us telling them that it doesn't.
So we have to speak at their language. So thinking about their cognitive development, they're not going to be able to hear us go on a 20-minute tirade. They don't even watch a 20-minute show. YouTube videos are like 7 minutes. That's all they can watch. So if we speak for more than 7 minutes, they're not. So if we're talking at their language, at their level, then they can hear it. And if we are practical, they can hear it. So, okay, can you give me an example? Like my kids have grown out of this stage, so I've forgotten stuff. Like what? Yeah. Like what does like a 7-year-old want?
I literally just told her, if Charlotte jumped off the bridge, would you? What was the girl doing? What?
I know, right?
I can't think of what the girl was doing.
Crop top.
Yeah.
No, it wasn't that one. We go to a private mission school, they're in uniforms, thank God, so I don't have to deal with that yet. But yeah, that's.
My son was struggling, 6 years old. He was struggling with somebody either lying to somebody else or treating somebody else poorly. And he was like, how do I respond to that?
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. Yes, the more that you can help them generate their own answers with your guided steps, the more they will have confidence in moving up through the rest of their experiences. So yes, asking them questions, helping him see what other people are doing, and how do I want to proceed? Like, look, there's options. So did you appreciate that they did it this way? Do you think there's a better way that you can do it?
I think he was more asking, like, do I step in and stand up for the person that's, let's just call it getting bullied, right? Or do I just let it happen? Do I speak up? I didn't know what the right answer was, so it was a tough question. So
They have tough stuff. And he's 6.
How would you have responded to that? It's just, hey, do you stand up for the person that's, you really try to kind of just cordially, de-escalate it? You say, hey, that's not, what God teaches us. I don't know. That's kind of the direction I started taking, but then I didn't want it to backfire on him either. So as a parent, I'm going through like 100 different scenarios in my head. But anyways, so how would you handle that?
So how I would handle it is different for every child, right? So you always want to consider your children, their capacity, and their personality, right? You know where they're at cognitively, and you know where they're at psychologically. So how much strain can they take? How much challenge can they take? You know if they're going to be able to, their skills, right? So there's some kids that are just better skilled at confrontation or better skilled at speaking, and there are some kids that are not. They're more quiet and reserved, and they're like gonna want to do something behind the scenes to support. So I like the idea that you're asking them to think through God's options, and they can pick based on their personality and capacity some options for them to act good. But the beautiful thing is there's no one right way. God made us all so different with different gifts. We want to foster those gifts so that they can grow their personhood and their character as Christ in the way that God made them. Every one of my kids, I would do that conversation differently. And you're going to do it differently with every one of your kids. At different ages and at different places. So think about their gifts, their talents, think about their personality, their psychological, like their what they can handle in terms of pressure from the outside, their own cognitive abilities, like how well they can maneuver that social situation and be okay with it.
It's really disappointing. I'm going to speak about myself. Most of my son's problem in the school, it's because of stuff that he has nothing to do with. For example, one of his friends got bullied with another one, so he would go fight the other one. As an Egyptian mom, we grow up that if somebody's bullying you, you push back. You don't sit down and just let them do it. But in the schools these days, if somebody's bullying you, you go tell a grown-up and you don't act, you do nothing. I see it as he's defending himself, but he's seeing as he's laying his hand on people, or he's shouting, or he's fighting with other kids in the school. So it's difficult for us because we came from totally different environment. We used to defend ourselves, but we want to tell our kids that, no, you sit down and do nothing. And also, most of the time, the biblical way will tell you if somebody hit your cheek, you give them the other one. This is how we were raised in the church. But no, I'm not going to sit down and let another boy bully me in front of girls, for example. So it's totally difficult for me. I'm going to speak about myself. It's difficult for me to raise my kid to be a gentleman, and in the same way, he will be a strong boy with a strong personality that he can defend himself and speak up.
So you have to then, we're going to move into, like, what are the specific morals and like how can we grow them? You would have to want to think through which morals, which values do I want to grow in my children? And do I want them to practice on their own, right? Do I give them opportunities to practice on their own? But something that you said too is that, like, you're pointing to Egyptian culture or American culture, forgive me, but the biblical way is not culture. Culture changes.
I'm talking about how we were raised, away from
Yeah.
Christianity. I'm not talking
Yeah.
about church now, because you have to do the same way
we have to do the biblical values. Those are going to be the right ones. And then whatever we do with our culture, God is beautiful and God made us all diverse and different. So there's going to be different ways to implement every one of God's ways and God's commands. But he did say when someone hits you on one side, you turn the other. How you turn the other is going to be culturally informed, right? Or gender informed or whatever it is. But the mission is to turn your cheek. That's the job. That's the way he's told us is the right way. So whatever feels comfortable to you in regards to culture or gender or whatever, you can think about how do I do that? It's in alignment to my culture, but it's going to be to turn the cheek because that's God's command. That's our leading principle. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but if we have this meeting away from church in any different center, doesn't relate to church, how can I respond to my kid? In a moral way, I want him to do the right thing.
Yeah.
But I don't want to tell him all the time, turn your cheek.
Hmm.
They are not going to accept it for long. You know what I mean?
Sorry, I think there's an answer.
I think, I don't have an answer,
Oh,
but I think
thought.
you may have, and I'm curious to know too, because going back to the example that you used, I think it was you said your son, when you ask, this is the biblical way, this is the law, and they conflict. I'm curious, what was your response? Because I don't know how I'd answer that as a parent too. How did you respond to that? Maybe that can answer her question.
So yes, John.
I think I heard someone, Lama spoke about this before. He said that the principle of turning the cheek is the first step. Usually when someone attack you and you attack back, then it escalates quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So, but if you let it go the first time, you might be able to find peace between you, and especially if it's a personal insult, then you are supposed to do this. If it's an insult to someone else, which is not your right now, you don't have this option to forgive it. Like it's for your family or your kids, then you have to defend your kid because this is not your right to forgive. But he was talking about the forgiveness because we see that there is forgiveness, but there is also sometimes where you fight back in the Bible. So he's talking about at the beginning, try to de-escalate. That's what Christ is teaching us. But if it continues, you're not going to be de-escalating every time and you're going to be run over. But you need to see how, in a Christian way, you fight back.
Yeah.
But it's just the first step. It's not like every time this person I'm going to be giving him the cheek. It's just the first response.
So there's a difference too sorry, go ahead.
No, last time they were talking about the difference between react and respond.
Yeah.
So you want to, again, like we were talking about parents respond and not to react. I think what I teach my kids is you act with who you are, not in a response to what the others do, general kangaroo rule. So if the other one is mean, if you react mean, then that you just label yourself like being mean. And you stand up for yourself, it doesn't mean that you respond to violence by violence. You can state that this is wrong, this is not acceptable, but you didn't have to hit back or to have the same mean to respond like this is not acceptable, I'm not allowed to go through. You know what I'm saying? It's to respond to
Mm-hmm.
that kind of situation. And you wanna, I wanna take every situation of those as a tool to teach my kids to stand up to themselves without acting the same way that the other kids do. So I let them know, what do you think? Can you go to the principal? Can you talk to that person? Can you give them a gift? Whatever it would take just to change the situation.
So yeah, it's not necessarily to be like, I love what Abunalame said, right? So the approach is to de-escalate in that specific example, right? But how then you move through to make sure that you have to be wise and guide them through is like wisely responding and not reacting. But if we wanted to like fight, you're only causing more tension and more violence, but we want them wisely to de-escalate. And that does take responding and wisdom and slow pace to make that decision. It does require self-control. It will require empathy to try to get into their mind. How would they respond to my reaction this way? Like, how would they best receive my message, right? And those are the values, those are the morals, those are the gifts of the Holy Spirit, right? But those are also the morals that we want to try to grow in them. Is the wisdom, the self-control, the empathy. That's going to help them de-escalate in that specific situation. Okay. Fairness. It has to be fair, like the middle child syndrome. Everything has to be fair. This is when we start to move towards understanding that authority and social order. Everything has to make sense. If it doesn't make sense, then it's wrong. So I have an adult right now in therapy who is struggling with that thought. If it doesn't make sense, it's wrong. It takes the next step of understanding abstract to get out of that thought. But here in the school age, this is where they are, right? There are fixed rules. Things are black and white. And I have to keep everything in social order in order for it to stay right. That is appropriate for this age. We want to also try to help them move through to abstract thinking and to thinking more in a social contract way, right? So that there's mutual benefit. In this point, there's mutual benefit. There's reciprocity. This is only one model. The next model is very different than this. But the idea that there is, like I said, morally right and legally right are not always the same. That ability to hold that abstract can be around here, around teenage years. But that's advanced thinking. Like, it's hard. It's hard to get you from, if it doesn't make sense, it's wrong, to, okay, but not everything makes sense. And sometimes it's just wrong. Or sometimes it's just the right thing to do to break the law. Right? Harriet Tubman took the African Americans across state lines to free them. Was that wrong? Because she broke the law. And she was risking her life. Was that wrong to risk hers and everyone else's life? That's a big risk. That's dangerous. Is that right? So holding those arguments really cannot be done with school-age children. You're going to explode their brain. They cannot think that way yet. Then, if we can get to this understanding that things are based on relationship, right? God is based on relationship. God himself is relationship. So when we think about how we are all there to support one another, to better each other's lives, to better each other's salvation, then we get to a different level of understanding right and wrong and morality. And then the last, which Kohlberg says like maybe 10-15% of people get to, is morality is based on transcendent mutual benefit, salvation. In my terms, that's how I'm going to translate that. He doesn't mean it that way, but I'm translating to salvation. If I can benefit grow my morality and grow the morality of others, being a father or spiritual mother, and bring us to salvation, then I am doing right. And that is the ultimate pinnacle of moral development. Okay. After Kohlberg, I should have done the shortcut one. Sorry. It's the same thing, but shortcut version. So, yeah, the beginning is avoid punishment, gain rewards, and then 9 to 20-ish, right? I made up the numbers because he doesn't give numbers. Is gain approval and avoid disapproval, and then duty and guilt, right? This is what's right according to the law, right? If it doesn't make sense, if it's not fair, if it's not according to the law in black and white, then it's wrong. So that's duty and guilt. And then maybe or never, so to, like adults, we get into post-conventional, which is that agreed upon rights. What are the rights of humans? Big picture, beyond laws. And personal moral standards. Okay, I did the next one, shortcut version. Let's do hers. So Carol Gilligan was a student or a pupil of Kohlberg. She learned the moral development from him, but she disagreed with his because his was based on justice, purely on justice and fairness. That was his guiding principle of understanding morals. And she disagreed with that basis of development. She said that people are more, it's not about what are the rules of the game, but it's more about thinking about caring and growing empathy more than the rules and justice and right. So her scale or her understanding is different because her guiding principle of what morality is different. And she has, later on they did like more studies and like they wanted the scientific process. So she actually has like evidence-based and stuff like that. And Kohlberg has a little bit less. But they're still good and solid. So for her, she talked about obedience to authority in that younger stage. And nice behavior is an exchange for future favors. So we see that when kids share their snacks in their lunchbox, right? Because if I do it today and I don't really like this thing, then next time when they have chips, they'll give it to me. And, you know, there's this exchange thing that goes on. Many people as adults don't get past that. But the hope is that we move on then to living up to others' expectations. My father of confession thinks that I'm capable of this, so I will have to try to do that. My mom or dad or grandma or aunt think I'm capable of that. I have to. I want to. That requires us as parents, though, and as those supporting figures, to give them really positive affirmations. I know you're capable. I know that you're a good boy and you can do this. I know you're a good girl and that this is your ability. Let's encourage you. Let's keep giving you positive affirmations. If we're giving our children like negative, if we're putting them down, if we're using language that discourages them, they will struggle to understand that I can and I want to. We're not giving them the food to help them grow into living up to my expectations. Stage 4 is follow rules, again, in order to maintain social order. So similar to the other one. What was it? Conventional. The authority and social order. If it's not black and white, if it doesn't make sense, it's wrong. And then post-conventional is this adulthood experience-ish, post-adolescence, young adult, and further on, where we adhere to the social contract when it is valid. It's the human rights of people. If the social contract, if the laws are not in adherence to what is right and good, then we need to be able, they in this stage are able to kind of work through, it's the right thing to do, even if it's a hard thing to do, even if there's potential risk or harm. And then this part is very similar, the second half is similar, where if I have the ability to know my moral system, Father Isidoros, Fathers of Confessions, any one of our saints who grow the next generation, then that is the ultimate, where I can have my moral base and grow that of the people around me. Okay, that's my psychobabble. I'm done with it. Do you have questions or concerns about any of it? All right. Sorry, that was a lot of information. Okay, now the meat of this is, now that we understand their abilities, their capacities, and what the developmental model is, how do we help them grow through it? Because again, remember, it doesn't come naturally. We have to walk them through it. It requires as parents, it requires as parents a lot of modeling. If I do not provide a good example, we don't give them any understanding of what that means. So sometimes that can mean sharing stories. This is what I experienced when I was your age, or like at work yesterday, this thing happened. I had to really think through, and I was worried about this happening. If I did it this way, that person would get mad. And if my boss heard, right? How did I manage and make those decisions? Help them understand the sacrifices, right? And that I can think through the implications of my moral decisions. Help them see it, model it for them. It depends on the situation. And it depends on their capacity, right? So we don't necessarily want to scare children, like your little ones, you're going to scare them at that point. But if you want to talk about when this happened on the playground when I was little, she came and she was so upset and she hit me, and you know what, I had to think about this and this. Give them examples according to their capacity. But yes, but you can start, but the modeling happens right away. But to start to teach and speak, it needs to be very tailored to their age and in their language and for their time-limited capacity to listen. Ultimately, at the very end, it's just a lot of parent prayer. A lot of parent prayer. Because what we're talking about is the gifts, the fruits of the Spirit. We're going to teach as much as we can, we're going to model as much as we can, but at the end of the day, these are the fruits of the Spirit. They're going to come from God. So we need to have them growing their spirituality, growing their relationship with God, growing their own understanding and relationship with God so that they can foster these. They cannot come from us. They are coming from the Holy Spirit. And we provide a practical example of what that looks like in this world. But it doesn't come from us. When do we start? Immediately. The first day they're born. On understanding what's right and wrong. How do I respond when someone cuts me off on the freeway? Right? What do I do when I get too much change at the grocery store? Right away. How do I respond to seeing someone sitting, needing support on the floor, right? A homeless person or whatever. All these things are examples that we want to be very intentional around what we're modeling and explain to them why we're doing the things that we're doing. Something that we want to be really, I don't want to spend too much time. I think I need to wrap up, right? So to leave you with this thought of parenting is not a power struggle. Parenting is an example of love and relationship. It is an example of the unity of the Trinity. So when we foster relationship with our children, when we foster love, we are fostering the basis of what they need in order to grow their moral development. Because it's out of love, it's out of empathy, it's out of care and kindness, it's out of gentleness and love, it's out of joy and peace, it's out of the fruits of the Spirit and out of that relationship that they can grow their moral development. But if I'm just doing a power struggle with them all the time, they have no basis of the love of the relationship. Everything is a power struggle. I'll do all my relationships for power, trying to gain power and take power and understand the power. We cannot grow morals if we're trying to grow power. So it's shifting our mindset about what we're doing in the day-to-day with our kids. I'm going to end there because I know it's getting late. I always talk too much. But I have a few books for you to look at. The one I really recommend is Building Moral Intelligence. It's here but she talks about the 7 essential virtues, which I thought were interesting. These are her 7 essential, and then when you put them next to the fruits of the Spirit, like I kind of highlighted in black there, which ones are very similar to the fruits of the Spirit. And so I like that one, and I do recommend it because it gives like practical examples of what you can do with your kids. If you want to grow their ability to empathize, for self-control, for respect, kindness, all those things, she gives a lot of great examples, like how to. Yeah. Thanks. All right. Do you want to pray for us? Buena, can you pray for us? Thank you.
Do you guys have any questions for Linda first up?
We did.
Name the Father,